how you came out of break, I think that the sports betting companies are going to do the right moral thing because that's what they always do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. That's what they're concerned with.
Absolutely, Greg. All right, so yesterday was a rough day doing the show after the rough news we got over the weekend that Zach Wheeler had the blood clot in his shoulder. And first and foremost, we all think of him as the human first before we start thinking about him as the player and what he means for the Phillies. But then you start thinking about him as the player and what it means for the Phillies.
Then we get selfish.
I'm in a really dark place following that news because their biggest strength was the starting pitching rotation, and you just lost your ace. What did you make of the loss of Zach Wheeler for the Phillies' chances moving forward?
I looked at it the same way I did when the Yankees announced that Garrett Cole wouldn't be pitching this season. Like, if there's one guy that's not named Schwarber or Harper that's indispensable to this team, it's Zach Wheeler. So, like you said, first and foremost, you think about the person, you think about the family, you think about the health. To get the news that he had a successful surgery is great. Now we wait and see on the timeline because this is pretty unprecedented. An injury like this is not something that we've seen. We don't know what the recovery time would take. But now we fast forward to the game last night, and I got a chance to watch a good chunk of it. Was there a better time for Ranger Suarez to come out and did what he did last night to at least give you guys and the rest of the fan base 2.5 to 3 hours to maybe just forget about it a little bit? And I think that, again, you're not going to replace Zach Wheeler, and we're talking in assumptions that, well, it's pretty serious. He's not going to be back. We don't know yet, so let's wait on that. But also, Ranger goes out last night and does what he does best. And I've been a fan of his for a long time. I called his games in the minor leagues in Reading, probably in 2019. And you got to remember, this is a guy that first announced his presence in 2022 in the playoffs. And if you look at his run the last 3 years in the postseason, you can make the argument he's been their best pitcher. 3-1 in 10 games, 8 starts, ERA under 2. So let's just say, let's put Zach Wheeler out of the equation right now because he's not part of the equation right now. You'd have Sanchez go in game 1, Suarez go in game 2. It's still a better 1-2 at the top than other teams that are playoff-bound have. So, again, take the offense out last night, and that was spectacular. Ranger Suarez getting back on track, that's a really good thing for this team.
Jose Alvarado comes back tonight. And, we don't know if we're going to see him used or not. But we were discussing this morning what the fan reaction will be. And more importantly, we talked about sort of what it should be. I personally feel he screwed over everybody in that clubhouse. The chances are, what do you think the reaction will be tonight?
I think it's going to be what you just said, and they have every right to boo because this is a guy that was supposed to be a valuable part of their bullpen. And clearly Jordan Romano ain't the answer. We saw that again last night. I think his ERA right now, he holds some dubious Phillies record for having the highest single-season ERA with X amount of appearances. Whatever it is, it's not good. And, again, when that news came out, it was like, oh, man, this is another thing that this team can ill afford. So, I don't normally condone booing. I think it's a little silly. But when things like that are warranted, then, yeah, the 40,000 at Citizens Bank Park should express exactly how they feel. And this is a guy, like you said perfectly, John, that listen, he was selfish and he really hurt his team. And I think that warrants an appropriate response.
Greg, regardless of the status of Zach Wheeler, there is still a belief that this lineup, if they get hot, could be dangerous in October. And we all agree that they are dangerous in October if they get hot. My question for you is, do you believe that this lineup, as inconsistent as they have been this year and in previous years, do you think they can stay hot for the entire month of October?
Yeah, I love going back to this on your show and others that I've done, and I've said this, going back and watching the playoffs the last 2 years, post-World Series disappointment. It's really the same thing, right? It's this team gets hot and cold together. It really more, I think, than any other team that's been in that upper echelon the last couple of years. It's very rare that you see them all going or it's very rare that you see a couple of guys off and a couple of guys picking up the slack. It's like 1 through 9. They just kind of ride each other for a little bit. So I think it can apply to any team. If you just get going for those 2.5 to 3 weeks, yeah, there's no reason why they can't. But I could also see it where, they get to the playoffs and that lineup doesn't get going, and you're out in 3 or 4 games. I mean, that's also very feasible. But I've always had belief in this group. I know that there are very conflicting sides. You have people that think like, this team, they'll be all right. They're still the best team in the NL. I think that they'll get to the World Series. And then there's others that are like, no, they'll get bounced first round. We've seen it in the playoffs, same old song and dance. Again, this is the last year of the window. I picked them to win the NL East. I think as time's gone on, prior to this Wheeler news, I thought that they were probably gearing up for another deep run. So now we're going to wait on Wheeler, and hopefully the Phillies and he get good news on his report.
Do you see a Mets going to be put to bed next week? Sort of like, the magic number's 33 today, which is really low considering where, it's where we are in the season. Next week when they play a 3-game series at Citi Field, if the Phillies were to go up and win 2 out of 3, it's pretty much over. Do you think it's going to be a late September closeout of this division now because of Wheeler being out, or do you think the Phils are potentially going to maybe let this thing be interesting for a while?
Man, that's a good question. I think that, again, a couple of weeks ago, if you would ask me this, I would have said, this thing's going down to the final week. And it's not so much a Phillies thing, but I watch the Mets and I look at a very flawed baseball team. I look at them and say their pitching is very suspect. Their rotation has not been consistent at all. And I look at them and say, I don't even know if they're a playoff team. And I said the same thing about the other New York team. I don't know if the Yankees are a playoff team. Like, I look at them and I think, man, there's so much more out there that's better than what these guys are doing. And I think that if the Phillies can just kind of stay above water for a little bit. And again, the Mets may surprise me. They may go on a 5-week run and go on a run the way the Brewers did. We don't know. But do I believe they're going to? No, I just don't think they're that good. And I think that it's been compounded by the fact that the way they're losing is very reminiscent of some of those old Mets teams. Like, you think back to the Willie Randolph teams that collapsed down the stretch. They're losing in ways like that. And you wonder now if that's starting to permeate into the clubhouse because, listen, they watched a very gettable division slip away a little bit. Like, they already lost one hand on it, and now they're kind of grasping with that second hand. And again, you said it. If you take 2 out of 3 or you sweep, you're thinking, all right, we got this thing wrapped up way earlier than we expected.
Greg, you mentioned Jordan Romano earlier when you were talking about Jose Alvarado. Can you try to explain to me how he is still on the roster? And I'm not trying to be harsh, but let's face it, they brought him in for a mop-up role yesterday, and he still allows a 3-run home run, and you saw having to get some of the bigger arms in the bullpen ready, like Orion Kirkering. Is this just strictly we paid him $10+ million, we got to keep him around? Because there's no way anybody believes he's going to find what he used to have at this point.
Yeah, I think it's two-part. I think it's, yes, we paid him over $10 million to come here and be a contributor. He was supposed to be the setup guy probably, or maybe the closer. He and Alvarado would kind of have a dual role. Clearly that has changed because of his inability to get outs and because of Alvarado not being on the field. But I think watching the game as closely as I do, and it's more about the state of the game than it is what the Phillies look at with Romano. But they look at that brief run that he had this year when he, I guess, shook off that rough first 4 or 5 weeks. And he actually did settle in at one point. I think they look at a sample size like that, an extended sample size, and they say, that's the guy that when he's going right, that's what he can be. So I think that's something like Devin Williams with the Yankees. It's the same thing. Why does he keep going out there in these late inning spots? Well, because they look at what he did for a very brief stretch, and maybe it was consistent over 10, 11, 12 appearances, and they say, yeah, that's what we've got in the tank. Now, it hasn't been there enough, but they feel that that's what is in there. So, they're looking at it and saying, all right, let's get him out there in a mop-up role. Let's get him to build his confidence up, and then maybe if he gets going leading into the playoffs, now we have him again as more of the viable weapon that we envision for him. I'm sure he's extremely confident after another great performance. Greg, listen, man, we appreciate the time as always. Keep up the great work at the MLB Network, and we'll be talking to you in October, hopefully for multiple times.
Thanks, buddy.
Sounds good, guys. Thank you again, as always. I always appreciate the time with you, and we'll definitely do it again soon.
There he is, our man, Gregg Caserta on the Comcast Business Hotline from the MLB Network.